In a recent article for The Conversation, my friend Dr. Doug Specht argued that despite the pervasive climate emergency and a number of relevant climate policy announcements within the budget, both the Chancellor and media reporting often sidelined ecology, the environment and climate. For Reeves, the budget was all about growth and productivity and the cost of living crisis, with headline fucking features like this 150 quid on average reduction in fuel bills that the budget proposed. And while some news outlets included the climate framing in their reporting, others seemed to simply ignore it. But despite this pitted engagement with the climate, the budget itself is filled with policies which will, as Dr. Speck argues, quote, shape Britain's emissions trajectory, energy infrastructure and climate resilience for decades. Some push in a low-carbon direction, others cut against or complicate decarbonisation. So why the pitted engagement from our media? For Doug, who comes at this as the head of school for Westminster's Media and Communications Department, there are several reasons for this elision of the climate frame which are embedded within the UK's media environment. Firstly, the government's framing of the budget, which is, as you know, centering cost of living or growth, was easily replicated by the media, and this sort of crowded out alternative frames. And sort of on top of this, the incredibly embarrassing leak of the Chancellor's speech before she gave it also played a role in framing the media narrative around like scandal or incompetence, which are sort of really easily accessible frames and legible frames for journalists to sort of immediately grasp at.
Soon after Rachel Reeves set off an unprecedented blunder, the budget accidentally published by the fiscal watchdog before the Chancellor had even stood up in the Commons, sending markets into turmoil, spoiling the Chancellor's pitch and adding to the sense of chaos engulfing this government.
Secondly, it just takes quite a lot of work to link policy to climate, to the impacts on individuals. It takes a lot of work and expert analysis. And there's pressure within the media to stick to tight outputs, tight deadlines. And this pressures journalists and reporters into defaulting to familiar frames, you know, like we said, to scandal or to sort of the political intrigue of it, or legible frames like cost of living. And this sort of links to a third aspect, which is that climate remains a beat, sort of fragmented from different parts of the newsroom rather than a sort of cohesive lens. As Doug says, environment reporters cover climate, political reporters cover budgets. The integration hasn't happened. So I guess what I'm hearing from Doug is that we need a hero. Someone to explain the climate impacts for a non-specialist audience of, say, like, I don't know, around 50,000 communists on YouTube.
I need a hero! All right, big fella, let's crash this party.
Glad to take up that call, Doug. More seriously, what I want to draw particular attention to here is less the technical media pressures and more of the sort of dominant framings of the budget. Why they have to take this dominant kind of neoliberal form, and how any climate policy in this budget, while not, you know, unilaterally bad, are of course wildly inadequate. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to do a quick little, review of some key budget policies and their kind of climate impacts and how they sort of fit within the dominant neoliberal frame. Neoliberalism still hasn't died. You can see its pervading and structuring effects through this budget. And I guess a good place to start, as good a place as any, is by looking at the role of growth. So neoliberal hegemony operates within a kind of contradictory space regarding growth. On the one hand, growth is the kind of fetishized goal for neoliberalism, but on the other, the sort of neoliberal period has been characterized by, at best, a kind of anemic growth rate. It's mostly hovered around 3%, but it has been combined with soaring corporate profit rates and a massive increase in inequality. So there's been anemic growth, but a massive increase in profits. Seems like maybe profits is really the thing that neoliberalism might be after. Who's shocking? Who's shocked by that? And so despite, or maybe because of this apparent contradiction, neoliberal policy frameworks often still prioritise funneling state money and institutional support into private enterprises for which the regulatory burden is still either quite light or designed as a corporate rather than public safety net. Take, for example, in the budget, the plan to scrap the National Home Insulation Scheme. This project worked with private companies to make homes more energy efficient. It worked to insulate homes, essentially. The independent think tank E3G argues that this project has, over the course of its 30-year existence, previously it had a much more robust framing, but over the course of its 30-year existence, it helped more than 15 million households save an average of £7,500 on bills and reduces household energy demand. And this is one of those things that is like exactly the kind of thing that would be an easy win for a government to say, we're doing this to deal with climate change and we're doing this to help the transition towards a more sustainable economy, leaving aside larger questions of sustainability within a capitalist mindset. It's a kind of double-sided win. On the one hand, if you'd expanded it, it would be able to significantly tackle the UK's dire fuel poverty rates, and it would also make progress towards, a real transition. Lower rates of energy use make transitioning to renewable sources easier. The more energy we use, the harder it is to replace that energy use with renewables, obviously. But the neoliberal regulatory dynamics which operate and structure this policy agenda really dug the grave for this scheme. Poor regulation and lack of oversight from the government resulted in persistent failures through the scheme, with private providers basically installing shitty insulation.
A company came to his front door around 8 years ago.
So yeah, if you want to come upstairs, I'll show you the...
Offering free insulation under a government energy efficiency scheme designed to cut heating bills and help the environment. For Richard, though, it turned out to be a hollow promise.
And so rather than reforming this programme to provide better oversight or even, bringing it in-house, which, maybe that would be a slightly better option. But the government, rather than doing any of that, decided to simply axe the programme to end it. And so despite the various fuel tax alterations, which will apparently save households on average £150 a year, the axing of this insulation scheme will likely have a really dire effect on the already terrible long-term fuel poverty that is, inflicting the UK and make any energy transition much harder.
An estimated 3 million households, 13%, were in fuel poverty last year, despite government help with bills. But the amount fuel costs would need to come down for a household not to be struggling with those bills, what's called the fuel poverty gap, jumped from £348 on average to £417, an increase of £69.
In the UK, 43% of households are struggling with energy bills, with fuel debt still increasing as the average household pays about 67% more for their energy than in 2020 to 2021. Even with £150 worth of savings, axing policies like this will both keep millions of people in fuel poverty while doing nothing towards any kind of green transition. As Ed Matthew of E3G stated, cutting taxes from electricity bills is a crucial step towards helping people to switch to clean energy, but this is overshadowed by the morally indefensible decision to scrap the National Home Insulation Scheme ECO. This is exactly the kind of sticking plaster politics this government promised to end and fatally undermines the best long-term solution to fuel poverty. It will also cost 10,000 jobs and prevent 1 million families from insulating their homes in the next 4 years. So even assuming the validity of the growth paradigm, keeping millions of people in fuel poverty will obviously have a detrimental impact on their ability to spend and grow the economy. The neoliberal contradiction between growth fetishism and anemic growth policies is clear. Another apparently contradictory neoliberal climate growth strategy relates to the government's investment in arms and defence. So the government has committed, as part of its commitments with NATO, to spend 5% of GDP on defence, which it claims will result in jobs and growth. But once again, putting aside the obvious that, we should just be massively scaling down military production for both climate and anti-imperialism reasons, it is simply also not true that this increase will result in jobs and growth, as the Transition Security Project explained in a short video clip.
So if you look at any economic analysis, what you'll see is that it's pretty commonly accepted that military spending has a negligible or limited impact on growth, whereas other forms of public spending, whether it's on schools, on hospitals, on green industries, that all has a pretty big benefit to the economy. If you listen to Keir Starmer, he says that you're going to see jobs across ex-industrial parts of the country that are going to be produced by this military spending bonanza. Military spending has a much weaker impact on jobs than almost any other form of public spending. We're going to see a huge transfer of money, £136 billion extra a year by 2035, double the budget for all schools in England. That's to me a target set by NATO, which is not based on any assessment of military need, any assessment of threat or defensive capability. It is simply to match the percentage of GDP that the US spends on its military.
But what's interesting with this is that it does get to a big issue with the development of neoliberalism into increasingly authoritarian and, in my view, increasingly fascistic directions. That is, it kind of speaks to the increasing framing of an increasing focus on energy security and security in general. So even when the climate strategy is discussed within the budget document, and I did have the displeasure of reading through that entire document,
it was really boring.
Even when it is discussed, it's most often framed through this lens of energy security. Specifically, the budget document repeats the phrase Russians' illegal war with Ukraine, or war in Ukraine, over and over again, specifically in reference to securing Britain's energy security, securing Britain's security. And I think this is an important structural element to ongoing green transitions, not just in Britain but across Europe, which are happening, albeit far too slowly, and in ways which simply replicate fossil fuel colonialism. So, for example, the European Union's transition politics focuses explicitly on maintaining energy markets within the EU while utilising public-private partnerships and straight-up private enterprises to exploit areas, particularly in the Middle East and the North African region, or the MENA region. And they do this explicitly for Europe's energy security, that is embedded in policy and documents at the EU level. And this dynamic is replicated to an extent within the UK, with the threat of Russia being used to justify plans to allow for new oil and gas production on or near existing sites in the North Sea. And while this policy will produce relatively small amounts of oil and gas, according to Carbon Brief, only 25 million barrels of oil and 20 million of oil equivalent in gas, compared to the new Rosebank oil field, which is currently seeking consent for the government and will produce an estimated 500 million barrels of oil. And while these new oil fields are still, producing a relatively small amount, it's still worth pointing out that to avoid catastrophic warming, we need to be drastically reducing extraction, not just increasing it slightly, never mind maintaining its current levels. And this energy security frame allows oil and gas companies to continue to operate and generate gigantic profits to maintain essentially business as usual, while the world burns. And it should also be noted that while the Labour government instituted a policy that no new oil and gas licences will be approved, several new oil and gas projects are seeking approval from the government because they already have licences. So there's a kind of loophole there that is allowing for further extraction anyway, a loophole which could easily have been closed. And while the Labour government has instituted a policy whereby oil and gas projects have to present the government with information about their, emissions productions before they get confirmed and are allowed to pursue their operations, this seems to be pretty much a formality. So you have cases like Rosebank, where technically it has not been approved. It's currently still in court, still going through review, but in Shetland, you look at local papers in Shetland, you hear what's going on in Shetland, furthest North Islands, where a lot of this oil production is happening. you can see that the preparation is just going right ahead. There's no break, there's no stopping. They are assuming that it is going ahead. They are operating as if it is already confirmed, which really should tell you all that you need to know about the validity and difficulty of this confirmation process. They are assuming that they will be drilling soon. The reality is that our entire global economic paradigm is underpinned by oil. Reduction in oil profits would result in global economic catastrophe. So we're in this irrational position of having to grow corporate energy profits and maintain the oil and gas production that is contributing to the desolation of the climate. Some of this is justified via the protection of jobs and the slow transition to green energy, but in the budget, increasing renewable installation projects is almost completely absent, with new nuclear energy being touted as the main means of creating energy security outside of new oil extraction. You might think, you might think it's easy calculus for the government to disinvest in oil and gas and retrain workers in renewable fields as the North Sea's Futures Plan supposedly aims to do. But I guess, as Nick Beuret argues, I think that's how you pronounce your name, Nick, I'm sorry, I've forgotten. As Nick Beuret argues in his recent book, the notion of switching from a fossil fuel productive economy to green growth is stymied by the fact that most green energy jobs are just low wage, insecure, and are installation work rather than production, rather than manufacturing, really. And so the sort of myth of green growth, of a kind of green Keynesianism harking back to like the 60s, 50s and 60s of great industrial workforces in the global north, the kind of golden age of capitalism, but green. This myth just isn't going to happen. There just aren't enough jobs to maintain our current productive arrangement and move towards a just transition. What's required isn't a green growth strategy, but a complete reconstruction of our economies. And I guess it's here that we get to the limits of analysing a budget like this. We can get caught up in all the policy details and everything, but fundamentally, policy cannot capture the need to rupture neoliberal hegemony, the need to rupture capitalist hegemony, frankly. We need to create a new economic and social paradigm whereby we don't grow every aspect of the economy, every aspect of economic activity, but reduce what needs to be reduced, whether that's oil or military spending or commodity production, and rearrange work and social life to be more fair for everyone. Green transition jobs being low-skilled isn't really bad on its own. It only becomes bad in the context of capitalist social relations. And I think one final point to bring up in the context of security and this growth paradigm and inability to deal with climate catastrophe is the Labour government's continued fascistic attacks on migrants and refugees. The new budget is dripping with anti-migrant, racist politics, including the increasing time limits for pathways to settlement and citizenship. Previously, migrants had to wait for 5 years to enter a pathway to citizenship. This is being increased to 10 years, being doubled for migrants. And for refugees, they have to wait 20 years. 20 years for any pathway to citizenship or settlement. And in the meantime, they will have their personal belongings confiscated to pay for contributions. The DWP is also consulting on changes which will, quote, prioritise access for long-term residents and those who make an economic contribution while privileging high-skilled, see economic, secure migrants within the migration process. These policies not only reinforce the neoliberal hard border filtering mechanism, which organises populations for exploitation while reconstructing nationalist myths and fears of civilizational migrant threats, but through this contributes to an increasingly fascistic atmosphere in UK politics.
I think another problem with that kind of rhetoric is that you end up inflaming the situation and sort of creating hostility and anger. And I don't think we need to be, in a position where we're being, praised by the likes of Richard Tice saying that we're using reforms kind of language, and that I don't think is necessary to get to where we need to be.
And leaves you with a sick feeling in your stomach.
Yes.
In the context of global climate catastrophe and the likelihood of increasing climate refugees, these policies create the groundwork for an increasingly ugly and dangerous politics. And while this isn't a review of all of the climate-related policies in Reeve's budget, because climate pervades everything, basically, from what I am able to briefly lay out here, we can see the inherent contradictions within neoliberal hegemonic governance, which leads to an inability to tackle climate catastrophe and the potential for increasingly fascistic articulations of neoliberalism. I didn't even get to the government's planning programme, which utilises neoliberal kind of abundance framings to clear pesky climate regulations and build more homes. Never mind that environmental regulations are not a block to building, and that our problem lies in housing commodification and the lack of social housing, not environmental regulations. Environmental regulations do not stop house building in this country. It's simply untrue. When they say that, they're lying to you. So to return to Doug, it's maybe unfair to expect journalists to articulate this kind of critique, my kind of critique, from within corporate neoliberalised newsrooms. But these kind of critiques of government policy do need to be made, and need to be made accessible beyond expert platforms, and also beyond YouTube's with 50,000 communist subscribers. You're all on board anyway. Popular power needs to be cultivated, and popular radical education needs to be maintained, which I guess means like and subscribe. Let's make this popular. Anyway, that's my budget roundup. Not keen, I guess, is what I would say broadly. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this quick roundup of some of the issues of the recent budget, the climate issues, and so on. Please check out my friend Doug's small article on it as well. It's a nice sort of consolidation of all of the sort of things we've talked about. And if you like this video, please feel free to like, subscribe, share. I know that people notice that I'm doing a lot more sharing recently. Views have collapsed on YouTube for many people, so every little bit helps. If you feel like you want to support even more, please feel free to become a Patreon or give a one-off donation via PayPal or Ko-fi. Patrons get early access to videos, as do YouTube channel members, and they get access to scripts and other stuff as well. $5 and up get access to a Discord server with some activity in it as well. For $10 and up patrons, they get their names read out in the credits, so I'll just go ahead and do that for you now. Thank you to my beautiful patrons Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Sovel Hayes, Anita Anisby, Bonbon, Cameron Blakemore, Daniel Swing, Earl Grey T, Ellis Wren, FD Signifier, Hey Joe, Joshua Moldenhauer, Kim Crawley, Nina G Public Relations, S, Tom Hutton, Unoriginal Name, Aga Ghost, Aaron, Alex, Barry Carroll, Kate Soiree, Christopher Poff, Daniel Hughes, Duncan Skinner, Esoteric Fictionalism, Eugene K, J. Fraser Cartwright, Jack, Jacob Quinn Schenker, Joel, Casper Gunda Vesterberg Larson, Kieran Gore, La Hume, Mason Colbert, Melanie Estes, Mark Gussie, Nelly Zacheva, Niels Abildgaard, Paul Singleton, Fia Westphal, Rachel Ann, Rachel Mixon, Robin, Tamash Kispeter, TB Skyen, Tim, Tinfoil Pancakes, Tom Price, and Xander Corvus. Like I say, please, if you can, think about signing up to Patreon or giving a one-off donation via PayPal or Ko-fi. Once again, thanks for listening, and love you, bye!